To grow the business, I have to, like John the Baptist said, he must increase, I must decrease. And I think the Lord wants to increase through our businesses, but for that to happen, in a lot of ways, we're going to have to decrease. And how does he increase? He increases through other people in many cases, and through their abilities and their time and their connections and so forth.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Wealth in Christ show where we inspire the masses to become financially free while building God's kingdom. On the show today, we have Mr. Darren Shearer. Mr. Darren Shearer is the founder of Theological Business Institute and the CEO of High Bridge Media. In this episode, we're going to discuss Mr. Darren's success as an entrepreneur and how he teaches people about marketing like Jesus. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Dommy. It's great to connect with you.
That's good. So my first question, just to start, who is Mr. Darren outside of being the CEO? What else did I miss in a little short description about you? Who is Mr. Darren?
Yeah, well, I'm a husband, a father. I've got 3 little boys. I get to work from home, so it's a real blessing to be able to be around my family pretty much all day, every day. My boys' room's right up above mine, so I get to hear a lot of pounding and everything going on up there. But love my family, my kids. And so my full-time job is I've got a book publishing company. So it's High Bridge Books and Media. And we started out doing books and serving authors, and authors need all sorts of different services. And so we've kind of expanded from there. And but the Lord got a hold of me years ago when I was in the Air Force. I used to kind of think ministry was just something that happens like in a church building. Yeah. And the Lord just kind of broke that off of me. And while I was in the Air Force, he showed me that Air Force base was my ministry. And so I really began to recognize the opportunity and calling I had to minister right there in the workplace that God had assigned me to. And so I took the GI Bill, went to seminary, went to business school. And in addition to publishing books and working with authors, I've also done a lot of thinking and research and writing and podcasting on this intersection of the Christian faith and business. And so looking forward to talking to you more about that.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that introduction. And that kind of leaves me, you definitely said a lot of things that rang a bell in my eyes, we want to ask questions. And one of the questions I wanted to ask is, you said that you saw you being in the Air Force, if I'm mistaken, correct, Air Force as an opportunity for you to spread the gospel. Oftentimes people want to think of ministry like you think of just like a pastor or someone in the church. So I guess my question is, what would you say to someone who's in that mindset that, if they're not in church or they're not a leader in church, that they can't have a ministry? Right now, we on this podcast, this is a ministry. Your own podcast is a ministry. So what would you say to someone who has that mindset that because they're not in a leadership role in the church, they don't necessarily have a ministry?
Yeah. Well, the Great Commission is to go into all the world and make disciples. Right. And so the Great Commission is not necessarily to go build churches or go preach sermons or, do a lot of things that we typically kind of replace with the Great Commission, but it's fundamentally about making disciples. And to make disciples, to really model a lifestyle, you have to do it where you live your life. Right. And so how much time do you may spend more time at church than the average person, Dami, but I think, most people might be at church if they're born again Christians, they might be at church for like an hour and a half once a week, probably more like twice a month for the average person. So if disciples are going to get made, it has to be out in the workplace. And that's where we spend nearly all of our waking hours, that we're not with, we're not at home. I mean, I have a home-based business, so it's kind of an anomaly, but most people, they wake up, eat breakfast, they're out, they're out there in the workplace. And so if ministry, and when I think of ministry, I think of making disciples, which, what does that mean? Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. I think that's what discipleship is. And if that's going to happen, it's not going to be by packing a bunch of people in a building to listen to, the man of God up on the pulpit, for 45 minutes or hour each week. It's going to be everyday Christian believers out in the workplace modeling what it looks like to follow Jesus. And in fact, that's where I see Jesus doing his discipleship, right? Was out on fishing boats and just going kind of from place to place in the marketplace. Nearly all of the recorded public appearances of Jesus were not in a church building, the synagogue, but were in everyday kind of workplace type settings.
No, you're 100% right. You're 100% right on that. Any lifestyle could be a way for us to reach the massive. The daily jobs that we do is a great opportunity for us to reach the massive. And it's interesting that you say that, because I realized, growing up as a student, going to college, in high school, I spent more time with my teachers and my classmates than I spent time with my own parents. For the past 17 or 18 years I've been in school. So just like, wow. Like you're 100% right. And some people do the same thing. They go to work and they spend all this time more than they spend with their time. So yeah, you're 100% right on that. And I want to go back to your story. You say, once you realize that, you can start a ministry in the Air Force, you say you apply for the GI Bill, retire. I think that's a retirement thing for.
Well, anyone that gets honorably discharged from the military gets their college paid for 3 years. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. So how did you go from that, going to getting ready to go to college, going to theological school, business school, to not having your own two businesses, you have two businesses. So how did you go from there?
Yeah. So toward the end of business school, and actually I went to Pace University for business school up there in your area. And there was a lot of pressure. If you're going to start a business, it's got to be like one of the, big tech companies, like the next Facebook or the next Google. And so there wasn't really much encouragement to go, okay, let's figure out, what are you passionate about? What gets you excited? What's the type of business that you would really get fired up about? It was more like, what's going to impress a venture capitalist? And so it really wasn't until I left business school that I began to really kind of look inward and really ask the Lord, what kind of business do you want me to start, Lord? And I had taught academic writing in graduate school and had edited doctoral dissertations for students there at Regent University. And I majored in English, and people would ask me, how are you going to use that English degree? And I didn't really know. In fact, I would say, how am I not going to use the English degree? I live in an English, speaking country. And, but all of that kind of led me to book publishing. And so started getting paid to publish people's books and edit their books. And that's, so 162 books later now, here as we record this interview, we've been able to work with quite a few authors and really help them to get their messages and stories out. So that's really, like I said, I had to kind of shake off that pressure to start a certain kind of business or impress a certain type of person, and really started to press into God. Like, what kind of business do you want me to start?
Now, I'm glad that you mentioned, the pressure in terms of getting into business and, venture capitalists or just starting your own small business. Like oftentimes, especially like I have classmates or colleagues, they go and get a business major. And I ask them, why are you a business major? It's like, I want to start a business. And, me knowing what I know that you don't necessarily need a business major degree to go start a business. You just need some education in the niche or field that you want to get in to start a business. So I want to ask, what would you say to someone who feels like they need to get some type of education in terms of college or some type of, live up to the standard of what a quote unquote business owner is supposed to look like in order to be successful?
Well, I mean, I will just be honest, like me going into business school, I would not have done that had the government not said we're going to pay for all of it. Because especially at Pace University, right in the heart of New York City, very, very expensive place to go to school. But the Lord provided, and I said, all right, I'll go down that path. But I think the best learning you can do, again, it goes back to this theme of discipleship we've been talking about, is go find somebody who is doing the kinds of things that you want to be doing, and go figure out a way to add value to what they're doing. And yeah, I mean, it might be like doing some kind of janitorial work or something like that for them, just to get your foot in the door, to figure out a way that you could be a blessing to them. And like if you want to like take over a big company or something like that, you got to start where you're at. But I think you have to find somebody who would be willing to disciple you. And I don't think that means you just kind of wait around for, how come nobody, it's like you're getting picked for pickup basketball game, and like nobody's picked me. Like that's not how I think discipleship works. I think like in discipleship, like it's not just 5-on-5, like it's everybody's got to get in the game.
Yeah.
So like you got to go and find the person that God has put into your life, like the way that Elisha pursued Elijah, and just go find a way to serve them. And in the process, you will learn. And especially if you approach with a teachable attitude. Yeah, I mean, I'm 100% on board with what I think you're saying, is that you don't need to go spend a bunch of money on a degree. I mean, hey, if you want to go spend that much money, go find that business person and pay them, and watch
Yeah.
how much faster and how much more you'll learn, and how many more opportunities you'll get as a result of just making that investment into finding that mentor.
Hey family, I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. And if you are and you have yet to subscribe to us here on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. And also, if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts and you have yet to leave us a 5-star review, please do so. Now back to the episode.
No, you're 100%. You're 100% right, and it's interesting. I never saw mentorship as like becoming a disciple of someone. But the way you broke it down is like it's the same thing. It goes back to the disciple, and as Christians, we should want to disciple others. In business and other aspects of field. And I want to go back to you started your 166 books, I believe you said, published authors so far.
Yeah, 162 at this point. Yeah.
162 authors so far, books that you have published. I want to ask you, what some lessons have you learned over the years, publishing books for authors, what makes, books do well, what makes a great publishing company? That's probably a better question.
Yeah. So, the publishing industry, book publishing industry has changed significantly, as, everybody listening to this is probably aware. And that's to say that the responsibility for selling the books has kind of shifted from the bookstores and the publisher to the author, and the publicist, for that matter. So I think that's what I mean. We've had authors come to us and say, "I want to be a New York Times bestseller." Okay, well, if that's that, and they say, that's just always been a bucket list item of mine, and I just I just know that God's calling me to be a New York Times bestseller. Well, I don't want to discourage you, but I want you to know what it's going to take for that to happen. And so roughly you're going to have to sell 9,000 books to 9,000 different customers, on not like direct or out of your trunk, but through actual, booksellers like Amazon, like Barnes and Noble, barnesandnoble.com. And so what's it going to take to get 9,000 different people. I mean, and then I'll say like, okay, well, how about your email list? So like, how big is your email? You must have some pretty good size email list. Oh, you know, I haven't really gotten around to that yet. It's like, because so if you know anything about open rates and emails and click through rates, which I know that you do, Dami, to actually get one of those emails to convert into somebody buying your book, you have to first of all get a lot of people to click through to that book, to the sales page. And a lot of those people are going to, most of those people are going to drop off and not actually purchase. But then to get all those clicks, you're going to have to get a lot of people to open the email. And then you're going to have to get a lot of people to open the email, you're going to have to send a whole lot of emails, which, so by my calculations, to get to, 9,000 sales, that's, you're going to be sending about 375,000 pretty personalized emails from a reputable sender that person, they get it. They're like, okay, I recognize this person. I trust what they're saying. I need to go check this book out to even get a shot. So, I tell authors to really define what success is for you. And so for a lot of authors nowadays, like my dad, for example, he passed away 2 years ago from COVID. But man of God, he was my pastor growing up. I mean, really my pastor throughout my life in different ways. But one of the best things that I ever got to do in publishing was to publish his book. And he wrote his story. He was a Vietnam pilot. He got thrown in jail a couple times for standing in front of abortion clinics to help, counsel moms and, show them there's a different way to go about this. You don't have to, abort your child, and, planted a couple of churches, but a really pretty remarkable life. But he wrote his story for me, for his grandkids, for their kids. So now, you can just imagine what a blessing that is for our family, even though we had no idea he was going to pass away from COVID like 3-4 years right after he published that book. But that was success for him, but for most authors, you want to get your message out, right? And so it really just comes down to standing in front of people and sharing your message and getting groups of people together, whether it's, your church group or civic group, or however you can get people into a room to talk about your book and offer your book for sale at the back of the room. That's how books are sold. It's not through, we do pay-per-click advertising, like we do these kinds of things. We do publicity to get authors interviewed on shows like this, but what we find is what actually sells books is that author speaking to groups of people and offering their book for sale. So that's kind of the conclusion I've come to.
Wow. And I want to say my condolences to you for your loss of your father. And it's interesting you say that, how he wrote the book just 3 years before he passed away, that it's still considered success because, no matter what, the book is we pass down to generation, your kids, they're going to know that this great man of God did this and what he stands for. And, it's not what I intend to ask, but I guess my question is, how important is for people, I guess, to write down, share family values, so they can continue to pass down to generation? How important is that?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to discipleship again, through the generations, and what for family in particular, like what kind of culture do you want to establish in your family? Obviously as believers, we want to establish a Christ-centered culture where our descendants, they know what we stood for, and that we taught those values, we passed those down to our kids. And so if you don't write it down, and it's not just about book writing, but podcasting, this how long is this episode going to be out on the internet? Probably as long as you're paying your hosting bill, right?
Yeah.
But a book, you can actually, in that sense, you can print it. You can, for a blog, you put it out on the internet, like it'll be there forever, as long as, again, you got to pay that hosting bill. But books are just so powerful. And so I think people have to really define what is success for them. For some people, success is even figuring out what their life message is. And so I started writing my first book when I was in the Air Force. I think I was 25 years old when I first started writing it, and then would publish it about 5 years later. And that's when I really began to dive into I was such a voracious student at that season of my life. I didn't have any kids, so I was able to do a lot more reading at that time. But really, my life message started to emerge through the process. It said that thoughts disentangle themselves over the lips and through the fingertips. So as you speak, you clarify your thoughts. As you write, you clarify your thoughts and really get a better understanding of what is that message the Lord has called you to bring into the world.
Wow, that was really wonderful. And I want to quickly just go back before I go into my next question, because reading your biography, I realized that because of hybrid media books, you was allowed to create another business, Theological at the Business Institute. So what stage of, I guess my question is, what stage of success were you at Highbridge that led you to say, okay, I can go start another business and also thrive in that? As oftentimes people like to start multiple businesses all at once, because of the definition of an entrepreneur or a millionaire, a successful entrepreneur or millionaire, is that they have 7 streams of income. So when did you say, okay, this is Highbridge Media is able to run on its own and I can go and start another business?
Yeah, I mean, really, they started kind of around the same time. A Theology of Business Institute for me has been a way for me to express my own thoughts, my own writing, and I think to also set the example for the other authors that we work with who are writing on a lot of other different types of topics. And so it's definitely helpful as a book publisher if you're an author yourself, because now you can learn firsthand what works and what doesn't work. You understand the experience of writing a book and publishing a book and trying to sell a book. And so, but interestingly, a lot of the books that we've published have been around this intersection of the Christian faith and business, or faith and work. And a lot of the people that I connect with through the course of having defined what is my life's message, which is really to help people discover and apply God's will for business. And through that, the types of authors that we attract for Highbridge Books are authors also that have that same heart, that they, like yourself. That's how we connected. And a lot of our authors, they've come on board with us just like this, through a podcast interview, which that's another thing. Podcasting is so powerful for building a brand and really developing relationships with like-minded people. But really, I look for convergence. So like, I don't necessarily think about it as, okay, I started this business and now let me go try to start another business. But what is naturally being birthed out of what I'm already doing? Because I don't have the bandwidth or capacity or, the intelligence or whatever to just completely like, I'm going to be doing this random unrelated business endeavor over here. And then I'm going to do this over here and then this over here. Like, I need to have convergence and like a sense of deep meaning in everything that I'm doing. And if not, I'm going to try to figure out how can I it's like kind of what I did with going to seminary and then going to business school. I don't like that those are separate. So I'm going to try to find the convergence between the two of those, so that I don't feel kind of like divided all over the place in terms of my interests.
No, that's very important that you mentioned that. And I want to ask, just to go on to based on what you just said, what are some challenges that you had to overcome as a Christian? You mentioned just now that you didn't want to feel divided between your faith and business. So I can just imagine some of the challenges you had to overcome, whether it's mentally or physically or spiritually. So what were some of those challenges that you had to overcome?
Yeah, I think the biggest one was finally coming to the realization that to to grow the business, I have to, like John the Baptist said, he must increase, I must decrease. And I think the Lord wants to increase through our businesses, but for that to happen, in a lot of ways, we're going to have to decrease. And how does he increase? He increases through other people in many cases, and through their abilities and their time and their connections and so forth. And so I had really kind of had to start getting out of the way. I think it probably would have grown faster had I done that sooner. And, don't get me wrong, we're not like a massive company. We have a couple of employees. We have 3 employees and then about 6 contractors that work steadily with us. But I needed to get out of the way and recognize that my time is the most valuable asset that I have. And so if I'm doing work that somebody else could be doing cheaper, than I could do it, then it makes a lot more sense for me to get out of the way, let that person do it. And now I just sped up my output, right? And now I'm able to start invoicing the clients faster because the jobs are getting done more quickly. And I can focus really on what I'm called to do, which is, at least in this season, is to do business development and also a lot of the Theology of Business Institute type things, which again brings in a lot of our clients because we just end up connecting with these seasoned Christian business executives, business owners. They're kind of at the tail end of their career, or maybe they're already retired and now they want to quote unquote give back. And a lot of times what that means is they want to write a book. And so a lot of our clients end up being that type of person.
No, I like the fact that you use the scripture, I must decrease so he can increase, and and I like the way you explain it, how it applies to business. Sometimes we have to get out our own way for us to succeed. And I want to ask, how has your faith, in Christ helped you in this journey? Because, just for you to even to realize that, I can just imagine it had to take a change of faith, change of mindset for you to even realize that you must get out your way in order for God to do what he needs to do in your business.
Yeah. I mean, I really have to have a deep sense of purpose in whatever I'm doing. And we get to publish Christian books. I think maybe had I come to these conclusions sooner about what is ministry and what type of, not just that it can happen in the business world, but that you don't have to go publish Christian books or sell Christian t-shirts and other Christian themed products to be doing marketplace ministry, but that you could be doing home repair business or a lot of other different kinds of businesses that are out there. I think it's helped me to recognize that the Lord wants to be part of it. It's whatever you do, and word or deed, do it for the Lord. And then a few verses later in Colossians, it says, because it's the Lord Christ you serve. And so you're not working for men, it's the Lord Christ you serve. And so the conclusion that I've come to is that Jesus is on the receiving end of everything I do in business. And so that's he's on the receiving end of everything I don't do in business, for that matter. And so it's just opened up such an adventure, more of a deeper relationship, and more opportunities to see God at work, as I've kind of pulled the blinders off, or the Holy Spirit's pulled the blinders off, for me to be able to see that in that interaction with that client, I'm interacting with Jesus as I'm interacting with that client, whether that's a happy client or an upset client, or, and the same with our team members. He's a big God, and he's everywhere, and he's all throughout the marketplace in every interaction, if we're willing to recognize that that's him.
No, you're 100% right. Just listening to you, just like expanding my knowledge of the scripture. Just like you mentioned in Colossians, of do everything as you're doing it unto the Lord. I think it's very important for those who are listening, those who are watching on YouTube, because oftentimes, I realize that people oftentimes get into business, go into different careers, and it's like they have to be this person at work or in their career, but in their faith is silent. Something I often say is rare. Sometimes it's rare to see a successful entrepreneur or successful, I guess, artist, who's, thank God until they win like an award or something. They're like, oh, I didn't know you was a Christian this whole time. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, and you keep mentioning this word marketplace, and it kind of reminds me of your book, Marketing Like Jesus, 25 Strategies to Change the World. I want to ask, what inspired you to write that book?
Yeah, actually, I wrote the whole first draft. You'll get a kick out of this. I wrote the whole first draft on my cell phone, going to and from work in New York City on the subways.
Wow.
So I went to seminary. I was in business school, and so it was right as I was kind of finishing business school and wanting to just really figure out what is the intersection between the Christian faith and business. And it just was this aha moment. I was really fascinated. I love marketing, very fascinated by marketing, and just really believe that everything we do in business is marketing in some form or fashion, or not just in business, but in the nonprofit world and government. If you're trying to get elected for office, as a lot of people are right now, it's all marketing. And it was just sort of like a perfect opportunity to show people that God's ways are better. I mean, who is a more effective influencer in history than Jesus? And so I started to just go through a deep dive into the four gospels, just reading them over and over and over again. And also at the same time, studying a lot of books on marketing, and looking for what are the marketing tactics that Jesus seemed to be using in his life and ministry, and presented those in the book, at least I hope I did, in a way that people could take and apply those in their own venture, whatever that happens to be. So that was really the heart in it.
Wow, that's really impressive. And you're right. Jesus is the most influential person. Christianity was one of the most followed faith. Almost 2 billion people follow this religion. And I want to ask, what are some 5 marketing strategies you can mention that you mentioned in the book that people can apply to their life today?
Yeah. So for example, one of the ones I like is when John the Baptist was he was sitting there in prison, and he was starting to kind of, this was the forerunner. This was Jesus's chief promoter. John the Baptist was prophesied about. He's a really big deal, and he's sitting there, kind of seems to be doubting, or at least questioning, if Jesus was who he says he was, and that the prophecies were all about. And Jesus, the message that he sent back to John was not, he didn't chastise him. He didn't say like, how could you do this? Like, how could you, I mean, we're cousins, for crying out loud. Like, but he sent back and basically told him that everything that I said I was going to do is happening. Blind eyes are opening, the lame are walking. And so I think for marketers, we have to be careful that we are accurately representing who we are and the value that we have actually, demonstrated in the marketplace. And because there's a lot of people that are, I'll just say, lying about their their credentials and how impressive they are and how great their product is, and maybe they call it passion or whatever. But Jesus always, his focus was on the proof is in the pudding. And so we just have to be careful in marketing. And this is another principle. It says in Proverbs that a false weight is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. And so this was in a context when the salesmen they had their own scales, and when they wanted to go sell something to a poor person, for example, who might not have their own scales or their own weights, they would just be dependent on the salesman to say, okay, yeah, this is supposed to weigh this, and so this is how much you're going to get. But it actually, the weight was off. It was a false weight, and so the person's going to get less than what they actually paid for because they didn't have the weight to verify it. There's that kind of thing that can happen in the marketplace. I tell our authors, be very careful about how you use the term bestseller, for example, because it's a very loose term. Like I was talking about, if you want to be a New York Times bestseller, you got to sell 9,000 copies to 9,000 different individuals in 1 week. That's different than you happen to be number one in a very small category on Amazon because you sold 25 books in 15 minutes. And now you're going to go tell everybody you're a bestseller. I just, even recently had to talk to one of our authors about that, which was a very hard conversation. And so, yeah, that would be offer results for every claim. I think that's one of the marketing like Jesus strategies.
No, that is really well, and I'm glad you kind of mentioned it because in this day of social media, the more I get into social media, I realize that a lot of it is fake. Like you mentioned, people will say anything just to get $1, and just to make money. And that kind of leads into my question. As Christians, what would you say are 5 things we can do specifically to constantly thrive in our business? And not get discouraged by other people. Like, you mentioned earlier that, as authors, you tell them to define their own success. So how can what are 5 things a Christian can do, as long as they have their success, their definition of what success that they're looking for, how can they achieve that?
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to discipleship and find a mentor, and that's not just people that are, somebody that lives near you that you can physically go and, be a part of their company or something like that. But just being a reader, for example, and aggressive. People are so accessible now with LinkedIn, with, social media. If you want to be let me say this, and I've told this to people before, you want to get an MBA, start a podcast and go invite people onto your show, like you're doing. Like it's just, it's almost a no-brainer. But it's amazing how many people don't recognize this and would be willing to go spend all that money on a degree that when you could not only get that same knowledge, but actually get a a friendship with these practitioners, with these business owners and people that are doing whatever it is you want to do in the marketplace. I mean, somebody's entering a new field, I say, go start a podcast. Like you want to be a professional counselor, and you don't have any counseling degree or anything like that. Obviously there's, licensed counseling that you're not able to do, but there's other types of counseling. Go get 10 different licensed counselors, other types of counselors on your show and interview them, ask them the questions where you want to know the answers. And it's just, build those relationships. So finding that mentor, I'd say, would definitely be one.
No, yeah, I 100% right. And while you was mentioned that, somebody came to mind. This guy, he's basically a stock guy, and from my belief and my understanding, he doesn't have any certification or license. But because of the way he's been teaching, the many podcasts he's been on, different people he interview, and people now consider him as one of the greatest investors, just because of the proof the proof that he has, the evidence that he has. And just going, that kind of relates with you saying, you don't necessarily go and get a degree. You can go and learn from people who already done it. And as a result, people will, you're the average person of the people you hang out with. Because you hang out with such people think you're just of that such caliber. And I'm glad that you mentioned that. And, just to kind of wrap this conversation up, I want to quickly ask you, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years as an entrepreneur? Where do you see yourself in the next 5 years?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I really want to be focusing more and more of my time on is the Theology of Business Institute, but specifically, and this is kind of what the last 10 years of research and study into this field has led me to, is a book that is going to be coming out in January called The Christ-Centered Company. And it's based on an assessment that I've developed. There's 37 biblical business practices that, as I study the scripture, believe that every Christian business owner, influencer ought to be doing in their business. And if you're not the owner, but you have some level of influence, you could at least be advocating for these things to change in your company, to really devote your company to the Lord. Even if it's a publicly traded company where the board wants nothing to do with God, you can still advocate for these biblical practices to be done. You don't even have to say that, hey, this is coming from the Bible. But I'm starting to line up some live workshops around this for starting early in 2023. So I think in the days ahead, I'll be spending more and more of my time on that. Because that's really what God has called me to do, is to disciple business people.
That's well said. And I want to kind of, you mentioned, I just thought about just now, your dad, your stay-at-home dad, where you do your business at home and your kids are literally upstairs, as you mentioned, so I want to ask, how do you manage, being a dad, being at home as well, and also manage your business?
Yeah, I think it's boundaries. I mean, after 5 o'clock, I'm not working. I'm not doing emails. I'm not doing any of that. I'm with the family. And then on the weekends as well, just cutting it off. I'm not going to be responding to clients. Boundaries is a big part of it, I would say. And yeah, just being able to, it is fun to be able to take breaks in the middle of the day and go up and visit with them. But in the early days, I won't say that it was always like that. I mean, I really struggled, before the company really kind of became sustainable. My wife, she was pregnant when we left New York. And so as soon as we got to Houston, my firstborn son was born 2 months later, and it was me being full-time, sole income for our family for the last 9 years. And there was no backup plan, you know what I mean? And so I just had to there was some seasons where I would just kind of get panicky and feel like I have to work around the clock. And maybe there is a place for that at when you're first getting going, but I know that that's not a sustainable place to be. So if you're in that for more than a couple of years, like something's probably wrong, and things aren't going to get better with your marriage and with your parenting if you're living that kind of life. So those boundaries are critical.
Thank you very much, Darren. And for those who are listening, I hope you guys don't see it as another entrepreneur, another guest on the Wealth in Christ podcast, on the Wealth in Christ show. I just want to, before I end the show, I want to ask you, Darren, for someone who may be listening, who may be a Christian, who may have the desire to start a business, Christ-centered business, as we've been talking about, what's one tip that you would give them right now for them to get started? We're coming to, this year is coming to end. So what would you tell this person?
Yeah, so we didn't really talk much about using spiritual gifts in business, but we have a spiritual gifts assessment people can take over at theologyofbusiness.com. Just look for the assessments tab and go to the spiritual gifts in the marketplace assessment and really get clear about what are the spiritual gifts that God has given to you. And the primary place where those gifts are going to be used is where you spend most of your time. Where's that? It's in business for most of us. And so just really get clear about kind of what your top 2 or 3 gifts are, and take an inventory of how has God already been using those, and how might he want you to really concentrate on using those and potentially build a business around.
No, thank you very much, Darren. And for those who are listening, if you're looking for a group of Christians who are working towards reaching financial freedom, look no further and join the Pray and Invest group, and stay tuned for next week's episode. Thank you again, Mr. Darren.
Thanks for having me, Tommy.